Poster presentation is nephrectomy with IVC repair in patients of Wilms tumor with IVC thrombosis.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dr. Varda Tahir from Pediatric Surgical Unit 2 Children's Hospital, Lahore. I'm going to present our early experience of nephrectomy with IVC thrombectomy in the patients with Wilms tumor with IVC thrombosis. Wilms tumor, as you all know, is the primary renal tumor in pediatric population, but vesicular extension is rarely reported, about 7 to 11% in IVC and rarely about 1% in right atrium. We have reviewed the retrospective data of 6 patients that have been operated in our department. All the patients were sent to us from the hem-oncology department after receiving new adjuvant chemotherapy. All of the patients presented with abdominal pain. There was one patient who presented with abdominal pain and abdominal mass and with hematuria. That patient was having new adjuvant chemotherapy that was given in hem-oncology department was for the downstaging of stage of the tumor as well as of the thrombus. The particular patient I have mentioned has the downstaging of the tumor, thrombus as well. He was presented with stage 4 thrombus that was extended into the right atrium. Adjuvant chemotherapy was given. Nephrectomy with IVC thrombectomy was performed in all of the patients. For this particular patient, we have to perform the segmentectomy of the liver that has been shown here. While performing IVC thrombectomy, this is the picture that was shown, the taking control of the IVC, then removing the thrombus by the periosteum elevated as the thrombus has been strongly adherent with the IVC wall. This is the IVC repair. So it is quite challenging for the patient as well as for the surgeon regarding the IVC thrombus removal. All of the patients, they were on our follow-up having IVC, and they were one of the patients lost the follow-up. They were later on referred to the hem-oncology department for adjuvant chemotherapy.
What kind of workup you do for patients? What kind of workup you do for patients with suspected IVC thrombosis?
So we have given them new adjuvant chemotherapy from the hem-oncology department. If the thrombus is extended into the right atrium, we take the help of the cardiovascular department also.
How do you assess it, the extent of thrombus?
We did the CT scan, the radiological investigation, and the Doppler scan.
Okay, thank you. Can we put on the screen of Dr. Muniba and so it's imperforatinous, not always a low anomaly, right?
Yes. I'm Dr. Munima Mahmood and I'm a pediatric surgery resident in NICH. The topic of my presentation is meconium and perineum in males with imperforate anus, not always a low anemia. At times it has been seen that the child in presence with the presence of fistula in the perineum or the meconium pulse is considered as a low inner rectal malformation, and the rectum in this patient is presumed to be low lying and easily be approached from the perineum. Here we are presenting the data of 11 patients in which it was presumed that it's a low inner rectal malformation, but on exploration, deep tract or extensive dissection were performed. This data was from January 2016 to May 2020. 11 patients were taken in this study. If I summarize this result, that 3 patients presented with a small pinpoint opening at the proposed anal site, but on exploration, it was found that a narrow long tract was going from anus to the rectum, and ultimately all 3 patients had divergent colostomy. Out of 11, 6 patients had meconium pulse or fistula at different level of the scrotum, and the deep tract was found in the scrotum, and all 6 patients had divergent colostomy. 1 patient had duplication of colon with bladder. Out of 11, 2 patients had penile fistula was there, and when we went for exploration, tract was found going parallel to the urethra. It was deep. It was going into the scrotum, and ultimately the diversion stoma was given. In conclusion, I can say the clinically appearing long-line anomalies are found to be deep-seated, and diverting stoma in contrast is a better option to minimize the extensive dissection in these cases.
What is your message that if I see a patient with meconium on the perineum, what should I do?
So we can go for a contrast study or radiological investigation. We can go for a fistulography, urethrophy, or knee chest position X-ray can be performed. It will tell you the level of your NOE, rectal NOE. They are not all.
Thank you very much. Now we move to the next. Okay. So her presentation is Haneke-Michels's stricturoplasty for skin level anal stricture in pediatric age.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present Haneke-Michels anoplasty for intractable skin level structure. As we all know, there is post-operative anal dilatation following anorectoplasty to maintain an adequate size of the anus post-operatively. So, because anal dilatation is unreliable, cumbersome for both patients and parents, so we decided to go early for structuroplasty. Objective of this study is to determine outcome of Haneke-Michels structuroplasty for intractable skin level strictures in terms of symptoms and anus size. This study is prospective descriptive case series, was conducted from October 2019 to March 2021, and only skin level strictures of about 2 to 3 mm was included. No post-operative dilatation was recommended, and patients were followed for up to 3 months. In this technique, in under GA, in lithotomy position, before surgery, anal size was calibrated with a Hagar dilator. Then we proceed with the traction sutures at 3, 6, 9 and 10 o'clock position, and then radial incision was given at the 2, 4, 8 and 10 o'clock position. Then mucosa is sutured and concentric to the given incision. Then again the size was calibrated with Hagar dilator. Then in the results, total number of patients was 8, male were 5 and female were 3. Age range was 2 to 9 years. As we can see in the results, there is pre and post-operative anal size calibrated with the Hagar dilator. We can see that difference between the pre-op and post-op. The median size that was pre-operatively, that was 8 and 9 Hagar dilator size, and then post-op was 14 and 15. And the resolution of the symptoms. In the conclusion, you can see Haneke-Michels structuroplasty is simple and safe procedure for skin level structures, and it obviates the need for prolonged anal dilatation. Thank you.
Thank you. So, how long has been your follow-up, and is there any cases of least stricture formation in your series?
No, we haven't seen in these 8 patients restriction.
And how long is the follow-up?
For 3 months, and then they are coming to us beyond that period.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we move on to Dr. Muhammad Usman Aziz. Who is presenting? Okay, so the poster is pediatric retroperitoneal teratoma, a case series.
Assalamualaikum, I am Dr. Vedda Zaki from Pediatric Surgical Military Children's Hospital, Lahore, and I am going to present a poster on behalf of Dr. Osama Aziz as he is COVID positive. This is the pediatric retroperitoneal teratoma, a case series. Retroperitoneal teratoma, there are about 3 to 5% of all the teratoma in pediatric population. We have done the retrospective review of the 7 patients that have presented in our department during the tenure of 2019 to June 2019 to February 2021. All of the patients present with the abdominal mass except one very interesting patient who presented with the history of the abdominal trauma. For all the patients, after the laboratory and radiological investigations, the exploration was carried out. And 2 of the patients, they were having the tumor that was badly adherent with the IVC and abdominal aorta. One of the patients that was causing the atrophy of the kidney, so we have to perform the nephrectomy. For the particular patient that I have mentioned, presented with the history of fall, this one patient, he was having a perforated sac in the subhepatic space. When we excise the sac, doesn't it look like a fluting fetus? We did the histopathology of all the tumors that were benign, and all of the patients, they are doing good on our follow-up. Except one patient, which was presented with one at the age of 1 month with abdominal mass, was having a mass that was involving all of the structures in the peritoneal cavity, and we can only do the debulking and perform the colostomy. He expired due to the sepsis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are not assessing your presentation because the presenter is not here. Okay, thank you very much. The next presenter is Sayyid Waqas Ali. Is he around? Sayyid Waqas Ali. So I think he is not around. He was supposed to present congenital lupus, a case series. The next is Anam Asif, Dr. Anam Asif. She's here. She's going to present colonic carcinoma in children, a growing threat.
Assalamualaikum. I'm Dr. Anam Asif. I'm here to present a case series of colonic carcinoma in the pediatric population, which is emerging as a growing threat. Colonic carcinoma is the 3rd most common malignancy in the adult population. However, its incidence is reported to be very low in pediatric age group. This is the reason that that caused the delay in the diagnosis, because there is low index of suspicion, causing increased morbidity and mortality. In this study, we retrospectively assessed 17 patients with colonic carcinoma who were under treatment at Children's Hospital. We analyzed the demographic details and the treatment details, and we found that the mean age of the diagnosis is 13 years. There was a slight female predominance as the male to female ratio was 1:2.4. The most common presenting symptom was vague abdominal pain, which was present in about 71% of the patients. About 35% of the patients presented with intestinal obstruction, where mass was found incidentally on exploration. Regarding the site of the primary tumor, rectosigmoid junction was the most common site of the primary tumor, present in about 64% of the patients. And 59% of the patients had regional spread at the time of the diagnosis. Palliation was done in about 59% of the cases. Palliation could be done either at the time of the diagnosis or during the course of the treatment, while complete resection could be performed in 29% of the cases. Regarding histopathology, the most common morphology was segment ring morphology, which was present in 47% of the cases, while 94% of the tumors were moderate to high-grade tumors. And regarding post-op care, only 6% of the patients had a recurrence of their primary tumor and they had to be reoperated. 6% of the patients developed enterocutaneous fistula, which were managed conservatively, and expiry was about 12%, and 6% of the patients lost follow-up as they left against medical advice, and survival was in 57% of the patients. So we conclude that our studies concluded that the colorectal carcinoma has a slightly female predominance, and the need of the hour is to create awareness so that they should be diagnosed timely, thus decreasing morbidity and mortality. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anand. My question to you is, can you tell the audience that how colonic cancers are different in children as compared to adults?
So the most predominant type was significant morphology in the pediatric population, and their presentation is slightly different from that in the adult population. In the adult population, we mostly see the patients, they present with PR bleed, tenesmus, and painless PR bleed, and they also have a family history of, you can say, colonic carcinoma in first-degree relatives, and in certain cases, we also see polyposis foliaris. But in the pediatric populations, there are certain syndromes that are associated with carcinomas, And also the most presenting complaint was vague abdominal pain, which could be present in other cases as well.
Thank you very much. So our next presenter is Dr. Mohammad Haris Patel. He is going to present on challenges and outcome for laparoscopic excision of giant choledochal cyst with worldwide impractical duodenoscopy.
Okay, so the reason for this poster is not to tell the audience what is hepaticogestomy laparoscopy. You have already seen that in our MIS session. What I want to elaborate is it is diagnosed the same way, but when you try to excise it, you see a whole lot of another level of challenges associated with them. This the giant choledochal cyst itself is defined as a cyst bigger than 10 centimeter in size. So when you are going for excision of such cyst laparoscopically, you need to cater your port placements. You need to be aware of that. You need to dissect deeply towards the porta. Towards the pancreas, as the cyst will be deep down and shifting all the structures around it. You need to be aware of there would be a lack of space. You need to decompress the cyst and you need to make your working space. You need to be aware of extensive dissection necessary and the time required for that dissection as well. And also, this cyst we have operated 5 patients. The time operated in these patients were well about 5 to 6 hours, while the normal cyst you have just seen in our MIS session took 3 hours, 3.5 hours. You need to be aware of the prolonged anesthetic requirement, the prolonged need of pneumoperitoneum which is being created, and the physiological changes which are occurring in the body. And also, there will be a lot of bleeding, probably 2 to 3 times more bleeding which you will encounter during your procedure. But these are the challenges we face. But at the end, the outcome is the patient goes home with the less morbidity, less pain, early discharge and everything. But you need to consider when you are going for such a procedure, you need to have expertise. If you don't know or have less experience doing such cases, please do not. Okay.
Thank you very much. So my question to you is that in those 5 patients with giant choledochal cyst, what complications you had post-operative?
Sir, currently we have operated 5. The last one we have operated was 6 months ago. Currently, we do not have any complications, no any seromas, no any post-operative ileases. Yes, there were in 2 patients there was prolonged ileus because of extensive dissection, but we don't have any post-operative complications as the significant ones which I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't want you to go like in a giant choledochal cyst. What I have seen is the drainage is prolonged, and sometimes it is for a few weeks, and then the other complication is I have one chylus society, and then my worry is always about the identification of pancreatic duct, because there's no anatomy there.
Yes.
So that is my worry when we do a joint head. So thank you very much for your paper.
Yes, thank you.
We move to next one, Dr. Misbah Abdul Ghaffar. She's going to present transperitoneal laparoscopic nephrourectomy in children with non-functioning kidney.
Assalamualaikum everyone. I am Dr. Misbah. I am a resident of pediatric surgery at NICH. Today I will be presenting my poster on transperitoneal laparoscopic nephrectomy in children with non-functioning kidney. Laparoscopic surgeries in pediatric surgery is recently advanced. Over the years, it is gaining success, but in GIT tract, but the use of it in urology is quite recent. Here I am sharing our experience of laparoscopic nephrectomy in NICH with 2 patients. My first patient was an 18-month-old male weighing 8.7 kg. He presented to us with a history of recurrent urinary tract infection. Here I have mentioned the investigation. Ultrasound KUB of that child showed bilateral hydronephrosis with right hydroureter and loss of parenchyma on the right side. I have also accommodated a picture of his CT scan, which is consistent with the same finding of ultrasound KUB. The micturating cystourethrogram of the child shows grade 5 vesicourethral reflex on the right side and grade 2 vesicourethral reflex on the left side. We have proceeded with the renal scan that shows right poor functioning kidney with 8%. So the primary diagnosis was right non-functioning kidney secondary to vesicourethral reflux. This patient was not responding to the medical treatment, so we have planned for laparoscopic nephrectomy in the child. The second patient was a 2-year-old female whose weight was 7.5 kg. She presented to us with right lumbar pain and symptoms of urinary tract infection. Her ultrasound showed right hydronephrosis with loss of parenchyma. I've also accommodated a picture of a CT scan. The MCOG of this patient was unremarkable, while the renal scan showed non-functioning kidney with 5%. So the diagnosis was right non-functioning kidney secondary to vesico-ureteric junction obstruction. I've also mentioned the operative details. The position was lateral position. We have used a 4-4 technique on the basis of baseball diamond concept. I have shown the port placement. The vessels were dilated by suture and the dissection was done by diathermy. We didn't find any intraoperative complications. The post-op time was intraoperative time was 90 minutes and the post-op recovery was smooth. So we concluded that laparoscopic nephrectomy for non-functioning kidney has become more feasible and is performed with good aesthetic and functional outcomes.
So you are going transperitoneal,
Yes.
right? So what about retroperitoneal versus transperitoneal?
We are familiar with the transperitoneal approach because we are doing laparoscopic surgeries intra-abdominally. But the retroperitoneal, we are not familiar with, we are not doing that much surgeries retroperitoneal, number one. So we have an advantage of the anatomical locations. First thing, and the retroperitoneal space is not well, it's not large, so there are difficulties faced during the dissection. So the transperitoneal approach is more feasible for initial learning curve as well.
All right. Thank you very much. So now we move on to next one. Dr. Mahmood Shaukat.
Which was the poster only?
Poster only, okay. So this is on neonatal severe hyperparathyroidism. So this is on management of severe. Okay. All right. Okay. So I request Dr. Muhammad Sharif to present his poster on management of pancreatic duct stone by pancreatic gastroscopy.
For inviting me. So, this is a case of pancreatic stone. 11 years old male child presented to us with history of pain in abdomen and vomiting for last 7 days, and there was also past history of similar attacks in the last 1 year. So, after investigation, the patient was diagnosed as a case of acute and chronic pancreatitis. Serum amylase level was raised more than 8,000. So we managed the patient initially by keeping NPO, IV fluid, antibiotics, and later on, after investigation on the CT scan, there was a 2 into 1 centimeter stone in the pancreatic duct near the head of pancreas, and there was some calcification in the lesser sac and tail of pancreas. So there was also in the CT scan suspicion of pseudocyst of pancreas, but we when printed the patient, there was no pseudocyst of pancreas because the CT scan was 15 days old. But we planned when we palpate the stone, so it was palpable in the pancreatic duct, and when we palpate from the stomach side, it was easily palpable. So we planned to do the pancreatogastroscopy. So we opened the interior wall of stomach and we have seen in the posterior wall of stomach, and then we taken the stay in the pancreatic duct and opened the pancreatic duct and removed the stone. This was the stone, and after this removal of stone, we washed the pancreatic duct and then we do the pancreaticogastrostomy, just like we did cystogastrostomy. So post-operative course was uneventful and patient NG2 was removed after 6 days and patient was discharged on 7 days. And now patient is pain-free after 3 months follow-up. So we conclude that this is one of the options for the removal of stones. So there are RCT that pancreatic gastroscopy is better than the blue and white pancreatic lesions.
So, what was the reason for recurrent pancreatitis in this patient?
Actually, in the history, we did not found any history of trauma or any other associated diseases for this cause of pancreatitis.
Thank you very much. We had a good session, and we started with morning with the circumcision from our friend presenting from Turkey, and then on testicular management for undescended testes, and the key message is that we need to follow those patients long enough to predict the long-term results. And then Dr. Taimur presented on gland anthropometry to have the local data of our children, that what gland size we have in our children who present with hypospadias. Then Dr. Ghulam Mohiuddin presented with Snodgrass repair and urethral mobilization, and the consensus is that if Snodgrass repair is done meticulously, that is the preferred method than the urethral mobilization, because you end up with more long-term complications. Then the evaluation after hypospadia surgery was presented by Dr. Anna Manzoor, and she have given a score by which we can objectively measure our results. Then very important topic of penile strangulation injury was presented by Dr. Bakhtawar, and a technique is highlighted and how this repair can be done safely. Dr. Eli Baksh presented on renal stones, and as he belongs to an area where except these are more prevalent, and then he is at a place where he can get maximum data. So it was stressed that he can develop guidelines at his center for prevention strategies also for children who present with high renal stones. And then Dr. Aisha Bakhtiar presented about cranberry juice for renal infections and weekly cycling and antibiotics. And overall, this was a good session. And then we were given a additional responsibility of posters. And so basically, कहते हैं कि poster में कूजे को दरिया में बंद करना है. So I appreciate all the presenters for keeping their time, and thank you very much for asking us to moderate this session. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry that it's not visible, but I will present. Myself, Dr. Saddam Hussain from Khyber Teaching Hospital, Peshawar. In my e-poster, I am going to present our experience of laparoscopic pyloromyotomy, infantile hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. And we already know that laparoscopic pyloromyotomy is gaining popularity and is being practiced worldwide, and has given better cosmetic result and decreased hospital stay than open. By this study, we wanted to further highlight that it is a safe and effective procedure, and like other minimally invasive procedure, there is a learning curve. As the surgeon becomes more experienced, there is a significant decrease in operative time and complications. It was a retrospective observational study between June 2017 and July 2020, and it included 42 patients with a sound-based diagnosis of IHPS. The different variables which were included in this study were age, weight, gender, pre-op resuscitation time, post-op hospital stay, time to start, oral feed, operative time, method of working, instrument placement, and communication. Tests of statistical significance were applied and the results are displayed. The significant finding that there is a significant decrease in operating time with the learning curve and no effect of method of placement, instrument placement on operative time, as already shown in the tables and graphs. So, by this I conclude that laparoscopic pyloromyotomy is a safe and effective procedure. Thank you.
Pheochromocytoma, difficulty in diagnosis. The objective of this study was to describe the clinical presentation, investigations, management, and outcome of pheochromocytoma. Methods and results. Our patient was a 13-year-old man who presented to our pediatric emergency department with acute pain in the leg, nausea, and vomiting for the past few hours. Taking detailed history, it was revealed that he had recurrent severe headache, palpitations, sweating, aggressive behavior, anxiety, and an episode of fits for which he was taking sulfuric acid. He was having these symptoms for the past 4 months, and he had visited multiple physicians, but he was not diagnosed. Abdominal ultrasound was done in the emergency department, which showed a left renal stone, but a repeat ultrasound was performed the next morning, which showed a right adrenal mass. His blood pressure was 230 by 175 millimeters of mercury. Heart rate was 140 beats per minute. Abdominal CT scan showed a right adrenal tumor of 37 into 37 millimeters. In the picture you can see a right adrenal tumor. This was diagnosed in the case of pheochromocytoma. He was prepared with alpha blockers 2 weeks prior to surgery and then beta blockers. The conclusion is pheochromocytoma is a treatable cause of hypertension. It needs a multidisciplinary approach. It can remain undiagnosed for variable periods of time during which it may kill or if you don't treat the hypertension. It may cause gestational failure, encephalopathy. Thank you so much. I think this is a consultant anesthesiologist. She's very experienced. And we were monitoring the blood pressure with Bayesian method, and there were minor fluctuations in blood pressure, but they were not very dangerous. It has been about 2 months. So far, the evolution is normal and he's doing good. Thank you. Welcome, sir.
I am presenting a area case of incomplete renal bladder complication without any associated congenital damage of the urinary system. A 2-month-old male baby presented to us with a history of drenching of urine and abdominal distension and dysuria. So, upon investigation, we come to the conclusion that the patient is in obstructive uropathy with red form UR. So the plan was to make bilateral ureterostomy, and further we planned that after 6 months we will go for diverticulectomy and urinary transplantation. But on second surgery, we found that there was a septum which divides the 2 bladders in a sagittal section and draining into a single urethra. So a very rare presentation of incomplete urinary bladder duplication was concluded and diagnosed. So urinary transplantation was performed and bilateral ureterostomy procedure was scheduled after 2 months. Thank you.
Nice presentation. What was your follow-up regarding this case?
The patient is under follow-up. We are planning to do a ureterostomy procedure after 2 months. So, because we have done the test in the last month. Thank you, sir.
Next is
अनाउंसमेंट करना है कि जर्नल ऑफ पीडियाट्रिक सर्जरी जो बहुत बड़ी अचीवमेंट है हमारी एसोसिएशन की। ये लोग 550 में 550 से 50 इतनी मामूली से है, ये लोग लाहौर से उठा के लाए हैं और उन्होंने एक भी नहीं देखा इसका। सर रहने दें बस, सर ये कहने लोग हैं, अब तक एक भी नहीं दिखा। जरा सॉफ्ट कॉर्नर का प्लेस हो। अब आप सबसे रिक्वेस्ट ये थी कि आप सब लोग सिर्फ 500 रुपए में ये जर्नल अभी सब लोग खरीद के जाइएगा। ये हमारी बड़ी अचीवमेंट होगी, 50 नजर लिखवा जबकि हम लोगों से पब्लिश किया, उठा के लाए और अब हमें बेचना ताकि मजीद पब्लिश कर।
सर मैंने 10 जर्नल खरीद लिए हैं अभी।
चलाया गया, प्रोफेसर महमूद शौकत का टाइम था, बहुत खींचतान कि उसको इसी तरह से साल 1.5 साल रन किया गया। अल्टीमेटली पूरा फाइनेंशियल सपोर्ट की वजह से बंद हो गया। आप सब इसको सब्सक्राइब नहीं करेंगे तो हमारे लिए बहुत मुश्किल है कि अभी तो एक्स प्रेसिडेंट प्रोफेसर लाइफ ने हमें फंडिंग की थी, हमने कुछ मैनेज किया, बट फॉर द लॉन्ग टर्म इट विल नॉट बी पॉसिबल टू गेट दिस हार्ड कॉपी।
Thank you Nabila, in short of time.
GRP Surgery Unit to Children's Hospital Lahore. I am here on behalf of Dr. Pranav Prasad, SGP, for some unforeseen reasons. I will be presenting a poster on chest wall hematoma. So what is hematoma? It is a normal mass of benign disorganized tissue local to that particular patient with a male predominance and incidence of 1 in 3,000 cases. Talking about hematoma, an 11-month-old patient presented to us with history of recurrent respiratory tract infections and a mass on left chest wall. The mass was mobile, 6 to 7 centimeter over 6 and 7 rib, and there was decreased air entry over the left lung. Relevant investigations were carried out. Chest X-ray showed a radiopaque mass involving the underlying ribs and a chiasmal chair. The CT scan showed a 8 into 6.7 centimeter mixed density enhancing median arising from the left 8 posterior rib. After MBD discussion, it was decided to proceed with thoracotomy and excision of the chest wall hematoma. Peroperative finding were a chest wall hematoma arising from the left posterior rib and encasing 6 and 7 ribs. The involved ribs were excised and the tract was closed with a covering flap. So it is the histopathology finding was also consistent with the findings of hematoma. So it is concluded that the hematoma can be treated by either conservative management or surgical excision in case of respiratory infections.
Nice. So this, I would like to ask you that pre-operatively, did you thought of performing a biopsy, clinical biopsy, rather than after surgery you perform histopathology?
We did perform a biopsy, was consistent with hematoma.
You did the biopsy before?
Yes.
You did the biopsy. Okay, thank you.
I'm Dr. Aisha Mukhtar, third-year resident in Yas Medical Hospital, and I'm going to be presenting a case report of a 5-year-old child who presented to our emergency department with complaint of abdominal pain. Pure signs and symptoms of intestinal obstruction were there, and with that query, we got an X-ray done that showed multiple dilated bowel loops. We got a CT scan done that further confirmed our diagnosis. With a suspicion of intussusception was made and we did an exploratory nephrotomy. On nephrotomy, we found that there was grossly distended bowel loop with adhesions, and on kinesiodialysis, we found that there was necrotic area and the terminal area was so basically it was Meckel's diverticulum that had been axial source, and due to which it had underwent obstruction and necrosis. It's a very rare complication of Meckel's that since on literature search I found that only 2 to 3 reports were there published on such times.
Nice presentation. Did you go for the gastric mucosal, biopsy for the gastric mucosa?
We did a diverticulectomy and the specimen was sent for...
was it positive for?
Yes, it was mixed. It came out as mixed.
Ectopic gastric mucosa.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Tahira Anwar is requested for her presentation, a very rare diagnosis with reducible inguinal hernia.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Dr. Tahir Anwar from Children's Hospital Lahore. I am presenting a case report, a rare presentation of comental cyst as a reducible inguinal hernia. So Congenital mental cysts are rare with an incidence of 1 in 140,000 hospital admissions. They usually present with abdominal distension and pain. We presented a rare case of mental cyst presenting as a reducible inguinal hernia. 2.5 years old child with 12 kg weight presented in the surgical OPD with the complaints of left-sided inguinal scrotal swelling, which was reducible and sometimes painful. On examination, there was left-sided reducible indirect inguinal hernia, and patient was put on elective list for left-sided herniaotomy. On exploration of the hernial sac, you can see there was hemorrhagic omental cyst in the hernial sac, almost 10 to 30 centimeter in size. So laparoscopy was done, and this omental cyst was rising from the greater curvature of stomach. Upon difficulty to resect laparoscopically, a mini subcostal incision was made, and the cyst was excised completely and sent for histopathology. Histopathology showed lymphangioma. Post-operative recovery was uneventful, and patient discharged on third post-operative day. On follow-up, patient is well, and on ultrasound there is no residual mass or any cyst. We suggest that lymphangioma is the most common diagnosis with the mental cyst, and there is only 4 cases reported in the literature of mental cyst presenting as inguinal scrotal swelling. So complete excision is the treatment of the choice because of the risk of possible complications. Thank you.
Nice presentation. But I would like to ask, who gave the diagnosis? It was reducible and came again and again.
Yes, sir. Sir, we don't know the pre-operative diagnosis because on exploration we find that this was...
you took it as a routine elective?
Yes, sir. Put on elective list and opened by a resident as a herniaotomy for the left-sided herniaotomy.
Who came for the rescue?
Yes, sir.
Who came for the rescue?
Associate professor of our unit, Dr. Gladness.
So it's black looking actually now.
Yes, sir.
Was it a torsion of the mental cyst?
Sir, we probably think that it is hemorrhagic mental cyst because on probing the past history, the patient mother told that 1 year ago, the patient developed sudden abdominal distension and severe anemia, which was treated by medical ward for 1 month and no diagnosis was made at that time.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum everyone. I will be presenting a case of pediatric pseudopapillary tumor of the pancreas in a 15-year-old female child. Pseudopapillary neoplasms are rare epithelial lesions and they account for 2 to 3% of pancreatic tumor in adults, but differ from other pancreatic neoplasms with female preponderance and low rate of malignancy. This child presented to us as our outpatient with complaints of left lumbar pain for 1 month, and she also complained of fatigue and weight loss. On examination, she was found to have a palpable mass. Investigations revealed raised serum LDH levels. A CT scan with contrast was done, which revealed a large, well-defined solid and cystic mass arising from the body and tail of the pancreas. The lesion was then sent for biopsy, ultrasound-guided biopsy, which turned out to be positive for a neoplasm. Immunohistochemical stains also indicated pseudopapillary tumor. She underwent exploratory laparotomy plus distal pancreatectomy with splenectomy. Intraoperatively, we found a large mass, 15 by 15 centimeter, arising from the distal pancreas, adherent to the middle part of the greater curvature of stomach, as seen in the picture, and also adherent and encasing spleen. Tumor was extending into the hilum. We performed segmental resection of the greater curvature of the stomach and transverse colon. Later, functional end-to-end anastomosis was done between 2 ends of transverse colon. Final histopathology revealed solid pseudopapillary neoplasm of the pancreas, and tumor grading was stage 2B. Because of its peculiar clinical and prognostic features, a definitive and quick diagnosis of solid pseudopapillary neoplasms is mandatory to avoid aggressive surgery and chemotherapy.
What was the pre-operative diagnosis?
Pre-operative diagnosis was a pancreatic mass. We didn't know the neoplastic nature of the mass.
What did you do to pancreas?
We did the distal pancreatectomy, the head was left. Thank you.
Now Sumaira Noor is invited for congenital hepatic hemangioma presenting with neonatal intestinal obstruction, please.
My name is Fiza Ahmed and I am presenting on behalf of Sumaira Noor as she is COVID positive. Congenital hepatic hemangioma presenting as a neonatal intestinal obstruction is a rare case. In an index case, a 4-day-old neonate presented with clinical features of intestinal obstruction. Preoperative workup was also done in suggestive of bowel obstruction, and on exploration the loop of bowel was stuck with the mass of And when we try to remove the stud portion of jejunum, the mass contributing, so the resection of hepatic mass with jejunum was done and jejunum anastomosis was done. On histopathology, the mass was consistent with hepatic hemangioma. So we include that hepatic hemangioma presenting an intestinal obstruction is a rare entity, and although medical management is effective, but in some cases we have to do the surgical resection. Thank you.
What was the investigation which gave you the clue that it is a hemangioma?
Sir, we have operated it as in emergency as a case of intestinal obstruction.
So,
with the diagnosis of obstruction, we didn't know that it is an hemangioma. We resected it because it started bleeding when we tried to remove the jejunum, which was inherent.
Was there any perforation of the jejunum?
Sir, it was the lumen was obstructed as the jejunum was going to necrose, and there was impending perforations.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum again. So, congenital web formations are extremely rare anomalies of the extrahepatic biliary tree, with approximately less than 50 cases that have been reported in literature up till now. Some webs are thought to be congenital, whereas others occur in presence of chronic inflammation, suggesting a pathogenic relationship. I am presenting a case of a 4-year-old female child who came to our clinic for evaluation of jaundice and recurrent attacks of cholangitis for the past 1 year. Her ultrasound and CT done outside our facility showed a query of polylocal cyst. We got MRCP done, which showed moderate dilatation of her intrahepatic biliary channels and proximal common bile duct, again strengthening the diagnosis of polylocal cyst. She was planned for laparoscopic excision. However, intraoperatively we found a nodular mass near the cystic duct causing extrinsic compression on the biliary tree. I'm really sorry, I don't have a picture for that. We took the biopsy of the mass and some mass was removed and sent for histopathology. A cholecystostomy tube was placed to let her obstructive jaundice settle. The mass biopsy turned out to be nodular lymphadenitis. POC was also done, which showed contrast in the common bile duct after causing intrahepatic dilatation. 4 weeks after her first surgery, her second procedure was planned. Excision of CPT web was performed over ERCP stent as seen in the picture. The reported treatment of biliary web consists of endoscopic dilatation or hepatojejunostomy, but we did an innovation, and this is the first ever case reported in literature, excision of bile cyst and primary anastomosis over the ERCP stent.
What were the complications that you encountered after?
So this child is around 4 months post-op. We have removed the stent. There were no complications that we encountered so far. Her LFTs are normal as well.
Is there any chance of future complications? Stenosis of again, anastomosis, urethral stricture form, likely this is also this.
Stenosis is definitely there in our mind. That's why we're following her up regularly.
What will you do if it happens?
Again, stenting and then.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Salman Bajwa for chest deformity, a surgical challenge.
Assalamualaikum, I'm Dr. Salman. I'm going to present my poster, which is basically on a patient of pectus excavatum, and modified Davis procedure was done on that patient. Here in the slide, I was just going to tell about pectus excavatum. It is the most common chest deformity in which there is basically depression in the anterior chest. There is basically a depression in the anterior chest which leads to sometimes cosmetic depression, and if in further some patients there is pulmonary complications and cardiac complications as well. So in our case, this is not the poster. So, a 14-year boy presented to us, basically started his journey from Rabia Khan and then presented to us in Lahore.
Nice presentation, Beta.
what was the benefit you got at this?
Basically. Sir, just let me explain a little bit. Sir, there is the procedure which was done. In the first photo, the line markings are there. In the second photo,
Line is out, please. Try to answer my question. What benefit the patient got after operation and any problem he was having before?
The patient was having respiratory symptoms. His LS index was 7. And treatment 4-5 is the indication for surgery. And post-operatively, his respiratory complications and lifestyle was improved. He was not able to exercise. Pre-operatively, post-operatively, he was able to do moderate exercise and it was increasing day by day. His pulmonary function test was increased and the lifestyle was increased.
What you call cardiac, apart from pulmonary, there are cardiac issues as well, vascular issues.
So basically the major complication which occurs is the right ventricular depression or right ventricular outflow obstruction, which was relieved, and the right bronchus of the patient in the CT scan and X-ray, there was emphysema. So the emphysematous symptom was also improved. They are shown in the CT scan that the depression is compressing the right bronchus of the patient.
Thank you. Well done. Now, analysis. You presented it as a paper as well.
Sir?
This one you presented it as a paper in the Congress?
No, sir.
Okay, go. It's an isolated poster. Yes.
I cannot see it here. Okay, so this is one case report of a tracheobronchial fistula due to a forgotten rubber band. A chronically retained foreign body can lead to formation of a sinus, which could lead to formation of a long narrow tract that is unable to drain itself. This would eventually lead to tortuousness of sinus tract and dense fibrosis, which will halt bleeding by causing ischemia and preventing the closure of the tract. 11-year-old female can I get this presentation here? I don't know. Okay, so 11-year-old female was referred to us by Department of Dermatology. She had multiple chronic sinuses all around her neck since 3 years of age. So they've had treatment at different hospitals. She was treated on the lines of the tuberculosis. She was given ATT, and she was treated on the lines of Job syndrome, scrofuloderma, and everything. So when she was referred to us for for biopsy for lesions, during biopsy we found out that there was a foreign body retained in her neck, and it was a rubber band. And we took out that rubber band, and it was around 18 centimeters in length. And she also had a tracheocutaneous fistula, and there was this picture shows a bubble was, we put some saline on it, and a bubble started coming out of her neck. And after removal of the body, she healed without any problem. And in conclusion, chronic non-healing sinuses with normal investigation and everything should not be taken very lightly. Thank you.
Is it presented anywhere else in the world, rubber band type of tracheobronchial fistula?
Yes, they are.
In girls or boys or
both ages, especially sir, in India, because they wear a lot of this dhaga and rubber band as a religious culture. So they have, especially Indians have reported a lot of cases in this matter.
Are a good study. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Just sharing, I hope my seniors have already seen such cases, but for the juniors especially and the young consultants, pyloric duplication is quite rare, and it commonly presents with symptoms of gastric outlet obstruction, and total surgical excision is the aim of treatment. So, an 18-month-old boy who presented with non-bilious vomiting and upper abdominal distension, and on examination there was a mass palpable at the epigastrium, and another mass, which mobile non-tender mass was palpable under the hypochondrium. Contrast enhancing cystic lesions, 2 lesions. As you can see in the contrast non-CT scan images over there. So we decided to open it. On exploration, we found an omental cyst along with with a pyloric duplication cyst, and the pyloric duplication cyst was non-communicating. It was a little difficult to excise it, but we were able to excise it completely. Although there was a small perforation in the pylorus which we repaired. The post-operative outcome was smooth, except for delayed feeding in these patients. So, just for my colleagues, it is a rare duplication. Complete surgical excision is possible, and it needs a meticulous dissection only, and it has satisfactory outcomes. The presentation with omental cyst is rare. It has never been reported before. That's why we shared it. Thank you.
Very rare to have that. He had this duplication of the pylorus.
Yeah, he was underweight. He was only 6 to 7 kgs.
7 kg, 18 months.
Yes.
So, was he having a good hemoglobin or?
Pre-operatively, we have to.
You had to transfuse the
We had to
blood?
transfuse and prepare him well. And after that also, we didn't have total parental nutrition, but with support, medical support, we followed.
So, what did you do with the pylorus? Double pylorus? Duplication.
The pyloric duplication, it was excised completely. There was a small perforation in the pylorus, but it was repaired. Satisfactory outcome. There was no problem post-operatively.
Thank you.
I'm here to present a very rare case of attempted neuriticide by a mother in her postpartum psychosis. Postpartum psychosis is a medical emergency with incidence of 0.2 to 0.3%. A 28-day female presented to us in emergency, and parents gave the history of evisceration of gut after forceful sneezing. But on examination, we had a dehydrated child with a cut on abdomen by some sharp object and with hesitation cuts on both margins. As you can see in the picture, there are hesitation cuts on the margin. The child was resuscitated and was explored. There was no other injury found, so contents were reduced and patient was stabilized. The child protection unit was involved. They visited the home and psychiatrists were involved. They brought the history and it turned out to be a case of postpartum psychosis. The patient was fine post-operatively and was discharged and is under strict and continuous monitoring of our child protection unit. The mother is under psychiatric treatment, and to conclude our study, we should remove the stigma on mental health disorders, and mother and child health care should be our first priority, and in case where we suspect any injury or any threat to child, we should involve our child protection unit. Thank you.
Very well. Did you took help from the authorities as well? You report this case to the authorities?
Yes, sir. The case was reported.
The police report?
Yes, the medical legal case report was also
What did
done.
they do actually? What was the response?
They visited the house and they admitted the mother for psychiatric treatment, and the child is under continuous monitoring of legal authorities and psychiatric authorities.
Bad mothers. Thank you.
The patient was a 7-month male child who presented in emergency department with history of urinary dribbling for 3 days and excessive crying, and he had also history of low-grade undocumented fever for 7 days and diarrhea. So this patient in emergency department was catheterized and obstruction was ready. On examination, he had only peritoneal rash, while rest of the examination was normal. And his baseline workup, including blood labs, was normal, and urine samples were lost. While his ultrasound was performed, that showed an echogenic material indicating that it was a fungal ball mycetoma. So, fungal ball uropathy is a rare cause of obstructive uropathy. Candida albicans is a normal flora present in mouth, GI tract and vagina. So, this can retrogradely travel into urinary tract and can cause infection. So, first investigation performed is ultrasound mostly, and the diagnosis is confirmed on urine microscopy and histopathology. And and the best treatment is achieved with antifungals and excretion of this foreign body. Thank you.
Very rare. How did it, fungus can go in female children, but how do you expect to go into the male child actually?
How did we decided to go for cystoscopy. You are asking.
What caused the fungus to grow in the urinary bladder of a male child?
There was a perineal rash and he had poor perineal hygiene. So it may, there may be, as the Candida albicans is normally present in GI tract, so it retrogradely may penetrate into urinary tract while urethra and can cause UTIs and
A male child.
yeah, he was a male child.
Very strange. Thank you. Thank you. Very unusual indeed.
Okay, sir.
Well done.
Sorry, Dr. Fiza Tufail is my house physician, house surgeon rather. She is working with me. She submitted the paper, but she couldn't come to attend the meeting. So I'll be presenting on her behalf. So Rapunzel syndrome, many of the seniors must be knowing, and for the junior colleagues, it's a trichobezoar. According to the latest definition or the description, a trichobezoar with the tail extending into the jejunum and symptoms of obstruction. This is the criteria for trichobezoar with Rapunzel syndrome. A 10-year-old female presented with abdominal pain and non-bilious vomiting for 6 months. There was no history of behavioral issues. On examination, there was mass palpable. On contrast on CT, a hypotensive filling defect was noted in the stomach with 8 lucencies. It was a straightforward case, nothing special in that. You can see the, sorry, thank you. So CT scan with hypotensive filling defect in the stomach with 8 lucencies. So after preparation, we operated upper midline incision, anterior gastrostomy, and a large trichobezoar was removed. This portion was in the stomach, extending into the duodenum and into the jejunum. It was removed and blocked. The post-operative outcome was smooth. She recovered completely, started oral feeds. She was sent home, follow-up. Unfortunately, this patient didn't follow. They didn't go for psychiatric evaluation despite our repeated requests. So that's an important thing for our colleagues, that follow-up and psychiatric evaluation is important to prevent recurrence. Thank you.
What was the size of mass pre-operatively during your examination?
On examination, it was about 10 to 15 centimeters mass in the epigastric region, but we can't define. Sorry.
Was it a complete obstruction or?
No, it was not complete obstruction. She had non-bilious vomitings. She was tolerating liquids mainly.
Your diagnosis was partial obstruction of the intestine.
Yes, it was partially obstructing. It was not totally obstructing. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Dr. Bakar.
This is PGR, Children's Hospital Lahore, Peds Surgery Unit 2. I am here to present a post-operative gastric outlet obstruction following hiatal hernia repair in infant. 2 patients, a 32-year-old male and a 1-year-old female presented to us with hiatal hernia which was repaired. Post-operatively, both of them developed vomiting which wasn't being settled by any conservative means. We decided to do contrast studies, and in the first case it showed a distended malrotated stomach as can be seen in the picture. We were suspecting a gastropolymerus and we explored the patient, but surprisingly we found IHPS and rancid pyloromyopathy was done for the first case. In the second case, we found a swelling at the level of pre-pylorus as you can see in this picture. We opened the swelling to find a pre-pylorus gastric duplication cyst which was excised. The post-operative course remained uneventful and the patients are doing fine on discharge. IHPS following hiatal hernia repair is a very rare entity and less than 5% cases have been reported, and no case of pre-pyloric gastric duplication cyst following hiatal hernia repair has been reported. Thank you.
Very smart. So, what do you think is after hiatal hernia repair?
So it wasn't for post-operative.
Any guesses?
Sir, actually there is association of other
anomalies
along with hiatal hernia repair.
All right.
There have been several papers published reporting the instances of these.
पहले हम बहुत स्पीड में चल रहे थे इसलिए मैंने अभी पूछ लिया. Thank you.
That the patient was lying in bed at home and her siblings were playing around with her, and suddenly she started crying. And the parents noted that thread was poking out from left side of her chest. Worriedly, they took her to a local hospital where local exploration was done, and they tried to take out the thread and see if anything was attached to it, but they broke the thread in the process, and then the patient was referred to Children's Hospital Lahore. So on presentation we did x-rays, and if you can zoom a bit, we can see a linear metallic density in left side of thoracic cavity here. After that, the patient was admitted in ICU for observation, and while being prepared for surgery, after a few hours we again did an X-ray and the needle had shifted medially and superiorly very quickly. So we decided to operate immediately. We started off with left side thoracoscopy to locate the foreign body. But we were unable to locate it in the left side of the chest cavity, and we did parenchyma, so we proceeded with thoracotomy, left side thoracotomy, and palpated the lung parenchyma, but we could not locate the foreign body still, so we used on-table fluoroscopy, and it showed the foreign body moving with the beating heart. So after that, we did median sternotomy and retrieved the swing needle 4.2 centimeter from the myocardium of right ventricular outflow tract, and the recovery of the patient was uneventful. She was discharged after 4 days and doing fine.
Oh, दिल की कहानी है.
Never been reported in Pakistan, reported internationally, but the first time I have seen this.
मेरा ख्याल है इस पीटर पार्क में दिल में चुड़ियाँ ज़्यादा चलती हैं, दिल चुड़ती हैं ज़्यादा. Very well done. But did you consult the cardiologist? Was there any change in rhythm of the ECG while it was on monitor?
We were not. If we can zoom this X-ray a bit, this is a two-dimensional picture. CT scan. Well, we suspected it to be in left side of thoracic cavity. Per op, we realized that it has migrated into our. Conclusion is sharp objects migrate very quickly and should be taken out as soon as possible. That is the main point of this.
वो शेर है ना कि ये भी है सहरा नवर्दी के हुनर में शामिल, खार कल्बे में चुभे सर से निकाला जाए. So very well done. Thank you. एहसान दानिश करते हैं.
Hello. I guess you all can hear me, right? Okay. So my poster is about a great injury due to dog bite. We all come across dog bite wounds. Here we got a child who was 3 months old. He came from Larkana. He weighed about 3.3 kgs and he had a dog bite over his genitals. When we received his patient, he had already been managed at another hospital in the periphery. The first image that we see, this is how we received the patient in our OPD. His right testis was exposed. There was complete loss of right scrotal skin. His left testis was absent. His penis was entirely absent. And there was a Foley's catheter which we saw in place, which was going in the urethra. So we admitted this patient. We initially started IV antibiotics and wound washing, and then we went for EUA. When we went for EUA, we opened up the previously stitched up wound. And we found that there was a very small penile stump of about 1 centimeter left, and there was the urethral opening was intact there. The right testes seemed viable at that time, and the left testes was absent. We even went for an ultrasound abdomen just to see if the patient had undescended testes previously, and maybe the parents didn't know, but the testes wasn't there. So the challenges that we faced, the first was, where should we place this right exposed testes, because there was massive loss of scrotal skin, and we had a number of options. The first option was that we tried to make space within the scrotal skin that was remaining. We found skin, we housed the testes inside, and we constructed the penile stump with the surrounding skin. The point of presenting this is that this kind of injuries, they go beyond the horizon of medical management.
Okay.
There are a lot of...
What are your plans for the future?
Yes.
What was
how to manage. So the biggest concern that the parents had was कि अब ये बच्चे कैसे पैदा करेंगे?
क्या करेंगे?
Yes, exactly. So the patient had just recently come to us. He's about to come on follow-up again. Right now, we went for a testicular ultrasound, a scrotal ultrasound. The testes are still of the same size. We have counseled the parents that we will keep on following this patient.
No, I mean for his manhood, not mankindhood actually. For his eventual outcome, what do you plan to do?
Sir,
or you will refer him to somewhere else?
Yes, maybe once the child starts growing up, we'll keep on
plastic surgery.
We'll see how much the penis grows with time.
No, it doesn't grow.
And then we will refer this patient. This patient will...
Have you ever heard of, because there was I take 1 minute,
There was one surgeon circumcised with the electric cautery. He used to take this and used to do it like that. He amputated 3 children, and 2 of them luckily came to me, and I told them, if you want to get it done, I'll do a surgery, and to get it improved, but to go to that Mr. जिलानी एक था, लेकिन उसके भाई 6 थे, तो जो भी थिएटर में होता था वो जिलानी, डॉक्टर जिलानी होता था, तो एवरीबडी यूज्ड टू डू दैट. हमने उससे 5-5 लाख रुपए निकलवाए और उसकी पंचायत बुला के फिर हमने उसको रिकंस्ट्रक्शन के लिए भिजवाया. सो आई थिंक फॉर रिहेबिलिटेशन देयर इज अ नीड, एंड जो पंचायत है उसके मामले में भी इनको कंपनसेशन होनी चाहिए. वेरी नाइस प्रेजेंटेशन. I could take a
Dr. Tariq has told me to present it here. This is a program which the Shaukat is starting. It's a fellowship in pediatric oncological surgery, and they are starting a 2 years program, which will include rotations in neurosurgery, ophthalmology, head and neck, thoracic surgery, and orthopedics. And the eligibility criteria will be in FCPS or FRCS pediatric surgery. And the candidate would have to write 2 research papers at least 1 per year, and after that he will be accredited. His evaluation will be a 365-degree, and there will be no as such exit exam. He will be assessed at workplace-based assessment protocol. And if anyone wants to apply, the address is given here.
I'm very grateful for this presentation, sir. Here I congratulate Uma. She's now going to be an oncosurgeon, pediatric oncologist as well.
Yeah, she's a breast surgeon.
Yeah. It's a time to go abroad for this training. Thank you.
Yeah, the plus point in this fellowship is they are going to select few fellows who they think are eligible. Then the hospital will sponsor them. They will send them abroad.
It's a great news, sir. Thank you.